Well, today is Maundy Thursday of Holy Week. And on Thursday, in the last week of Jesus' life, he washed his disciples' feet. And so we're going to read that passage today out of John 13. And what we're going to see in this passage is if this was the only passage that we had in Scripture, we would get almost everything that we need regarding who Jesus is, about what he came to do, and about what it means to follow him. And so in this first section here, we're going to look at verses 1 through 11, and this shows us who Jesus is and what he came to do. Let's read it together. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" Jesus answered him, "What I am doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand." Peter said to him, "You shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet also, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "The one who is bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you," for he knew who was to betray him. That was why he said, "Not all of you are clean." Well, when I was in college, one summer I worked as a camp counselor, and the week of counselor training, we did kind of one night was kind of a surprise where we were all led into the lodge where the leadership team at the camp was waiting for us with basins of water, and they washed our feet one by one. Now, I think a camp counselor is the closest we can get to our feet looking like the people in Jesus' day. We were all wearing chacos. We were walking around in the mud and the dirt all day. Camp counselors aren't really, they don't shower as much as the average person or as much as they should. And so your feet are really dirty and disgusting. And yet our leadership team, one by one, scrubbed our feet. And that's what I really learned is that foot washing, what Jesus does here, is one of the most intimate and kind things you can do for another person. Now, more so than that, Jesus is using the foot washing as an example to show them about who he is and what he's come to do. We see that right here in the first verse. John sets this up to really frame it in terms of what's going to happen tomorrow in Jesus' death on Good Friday. And so he says that this is, in verse 1, before the feast of the Passover. The Passover was the great Jewish festival that celebrated God's redemption of his people through a Passover lamb, a sacrificial lamb. And John is saying, Jesus is showing us what it means that he is going to selflessly sacrifice himself and be that lamb tomorrow. He's preparing for that. Secondly, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, he's saying that his hour has come. It's the time has officially arrived. And what Jesus is going to do tomorrow is actually going to connect them to the Father. But in order to do that, he has to wash them. And that by him stooping down to wash them, that's the way in which they're going to be connected to God. In fact, there is no other way. That's the only means by which it can happen. And lastly, the last part of verse 1. It says that having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. By taking the form of a servant, only servants and slaves would wash feet in this culture because of how such a dirty job that it was. It says by taking this form, he loved them to the end. And that doesn't just mean to the end of his life. It means to the utmost. That selfless and sacrificial love is the highest form of love. And that's what Jesus came to do. Now, Peter represents those of us who don't really understand the meaning of what Jesus is doing, like why he has to take this form of a servant and why he has to serve even unto death. And so we see him here in verse 8. He says, "You shall never wash my feet." And Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash you, you have no share with me." Jesus is saying, you must let me cleanse you. You must let me wash you. In fact, that is the way to be connected to God and to receive reconciliation with the Father, is you have to let me do that. And so his foot washing is representative of what he's going to do tomorrow on the cross. Now, in this next section, verses 12 through 17, we get a picture of what it means to follow Jesus. It says, when he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I've given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Oftentimes in our society, we think that we need to graduate past foot washing, right? Like we do the dirty jobs initially, and then we get to kind of move past them. And so think about like when you are just starting out in a company, in an entry-level position or an internship. You have to do kind of the stuff that nobody really else wants to do to earn your way to a promotion where you can leave some of those things behind. Or maybe when you're a new parent, right? You have to change a diaper like 8 to 12 times a day. You have to just like really selflessly, constantly watch this little life and take care of it, to protect it. And it's a lot of hard, dirty work. And then your kids get a little bit older and they can kind of learn to take care of themselves in some ways, and you don't have to do that anymore. Or even sometimes when you're starting out in a relationship and you're dating someone, it's really easy to want to do extravagant acts of service and love to show them that really that they should be with you. And then you get married, and sometimes over time that wears off, and you don't do as much to serve the other person, and you don't sacrifice as much for them, and because you've kind of moved on past that phase, and now you're in a secure relationship. Jesus is teaching them here, you actually never graduate past foot washing. You never graduate past the idea of sacrificial leadership and servant-heartedness. And Jesus proved this, that even though he was the greatest, he was God himself, he took on human flesh, which was an act of selflessness. And not only that, but then he lowers himself to the point of a servant or a slave as a human. He's saying, no, the more you graduate, the more you get promoted, the longer you learn how to lead, the more you learn how to serve. This is why he says in verse 16, truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. And so we must all learn to do what Jesus has done. That's what it means to be a follower of him and to understand what he's done for us. And so for today on this Maundy Thursday, what I want to invite you to do is, if you're comfortable with those in your home, is to actually perform a foot washing ceremony for them, to learn from what Jesus did and to wash their feet. Now, I know some of you are thinking like, I don't think I can do that with my current roommate situation, which is totally fine. I just want to put it on you then to be creative, to think of what's an extravagant act of selflessness and service that you can perform for those that you are quarantined with. Because when you do that, you actually understand more what Jesus is going to do on Good Friday. And as he said here, you're blessed.